There's other characters I've written about, and after one or two books, I feel like I've said what there needs to be said. So it's a really hard thing to like pinpoint why. Like, why is there more to say about Harry Bosch? I don't really know, but he just remains intriguing to me. And as long as you have that as a writer, you're going to dive in and go back to those kind of characters.
Would it be fair to say there's quite a bit of Harry Bosch, of you in Harry Bosch?
Yeah, it's fair to say that now. It really depends. I've written about him for about 25 years, and initially I wanted to write about someone completely different from me because I had no idea whether that book would ever get published, and I wanted to have fun during the year or two that I wrote it. So initially we were nothing alike, and then I got lucky and it got published, and then there was a call for another book and then another book, and over time keeping that separation was really impossible. So I started sharing more and more with him. Probably most notably is that we have daughters the same age, so the whole fatherhood concept is a shared experience between me and Harry.
Was that ever intimidating? When you're about 2 or 3 books in, did you ever think, okay, I have a serious character. Am I worried he's ever going to run out of steam? Am I going to have to put more of me in there? Did that ever give you pause?
No, not really. I mean, I guess, I don't know. If you're going to do this for a living, I guess you have to have some level of confidence that you have more than one character in you. So I always felt like I would know ahead of any readers or critics that I've run out of steam and it's time to end the series, and I will just come up with something else. So, I don't want to ever be in a position where I feel like I'm kind of keeping him on life support or something just so I can kick out another book. When I feel that, I think that's the time to end the series.
Okay, your background is in journalism, and one of my favorite books of yours is, in fact, Crime Beat, which is the collection of non-fiction articles. Now, one of the things with reality and a lot of the stories in Crime Beat is they don't necessarily have a happy ending or even a resolution. There's a lot of open endings there.
Right.
Is your fiction some way of redressing that?
I guess it is in a way. I mean, some of the books I've written have been inspired by stories I wrote as a newspaper reporter that didn't have endings. I remember, when I retired from being a journalist and was a full-time writer, and I was clearing out my file cabinets at the newspaper, I had tons of files that I would open when there was a murder or something I wrote about. I would create a file and I'd write inside it the detective's name and number, and put anything that was pertinent to that case into that file, so I'd be ready to go as soon as they caught somebody. And I was like getting rid of dozens of files of cases that they didn't catch anybody. So it was like a cold water in the face that I was leaving that world of reality to become a writer whose books always have everything tied up at the end. So it was kind of a bit of a dark day, but it was also a good reminder to not tie everything up. There's always going to be loose ends. And yes, I have to, conclude a big, mystery at the end of every book, because that's why people read them. But it was a great reminder to not solve everything, to always leave something untied, even if that bothers a reader. It's my little acknowledgement that crime fiction is quite different from crime nonfiction.
Harry, of course, in some of the more recent novels, he has been working cold cases. He has been going back and opening up those cases. Looking back at the Crime Beat stories, is there a case that you'd want to go back to and reopen? Or?
Yeah, there's one. It's called the Vic Weiss case, and I actually did write a novel called Trunk Music that kind of solved it, But the reality of the case, this was a guy who was like a car dealer, kind of famous because he did commercials and stuff in Los Angeles, who was found in the trunk of his car, shot to death, his Rolls Royce, in fact. And that was never solved. And I got to know the detectives on that case pretty well and spent time with them. And, they had their theories, but they just had nothing they could ever prove. And it's kind of been a lasting mystery in Los Angeles that would be really interesting to know what really happened.
Now, how important is making an emotional connection for you? Because a lot of crime novels, they're seen as puzzles to be solved, the locked room mystery, that sort of thing. But certainly with your books, there's a lot of focus on the cops, there's a lot of focus on the victims. How important is that emotional connection with the reader for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's really important for me as a writer. I just don't want to write a perfectly honed plot. To me, that's window dressing on a character story. So I always want to have a character at the center of the story, and that brings in the emotional stakes and so forth. And that's how I get through, a year of writing a book. That's quite a different thing than reading a book, which can take you, 2-3 days a week, something much shorter. So I have to make sure I'm plugged in to write the book. And if that works, I just have this belief, if it works for me, then it's going to work for the reader. But I also, sorry for the long answers, but I do think that's what the readers are looking for. There is a percentage that just want to be fooled or they want to outsmart the writer, and all that's fine. But I think generally readers are looking for an emotional connection with a character, an emotional experience.
Has a reader ever given you feedback on a book or spoken to you about something that you thought, that's not what I intended, but actually you're completely spot on there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example, but that's happened a few times where it's funny. It's usually someone gets a higher meaning or metaphor out of something that you either had no idea about or it was subconscious, and it is there and it works. And of course, your answer is always, "Oh yeah, I meant that." So.
How has your writing technique changed since you started out? I mean, you're a journalist, so you're used to hitting deadlines. You're probably a very efficient writer as well. There's no fat in your books. But in terms of sitting down at your desk and writing, how has that changed over the last few years?
The big change is the distractions outside of that, but the actual work when you're at your desk or at your computer, for me, hasn't changed. It's, to me, the changes are getting to that desk, getting the time to get there. There's a TV show now based on Bosch that I'm involved in. There's book tours and so forth. And, my life has gotten more complicated. And by that, I mean, it just makes the time that I'm in a room by myself, in the locked room by myself, trying to create and write. It makes those times more precious because they're harder to get to. That room hasn't changed, but I would say one thing that has changed is my ever-developing skill to be able to write when I'm not in that room, like write on planes, write in the back of cars, write while waiting for planes, in hotel rooms, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of weird. It's come back full circle to journalism, where you just had to write every day, and sometimes you had to write on a telephone, calling someone who's writing it for you and working it out over a phone and so forth. More of a catch as catch can lifestyle and writing style, and it's kind of more like that now for me.
Are you someone who outlines very much, or do you tend to jump in with both feet these days?
I went through many years of never outlining, never putting anything on paper. It was just more fun to write that way. In my head, I would know the beginning and the end, and that's all I needed and to start off. And then about 4 years ago, we started working on a television show based on Bosch. And, we have a writing staff, and we sit in a room and we essentially outline. We put 3x5 cards up on the wall for each episode, and they're very heavily outlined in that way. And I began to kind of see the merit in that. And that's kind of influenced my writing as of late. I don't do the cards on the wall type thing, but now I'm writing more stuff down in a notebook. Maybe that's a function of age, or I'm worried I'm going to forget it or something. But I wrote maybe 20 books without ever putting anything on paper other than the book itself.
Right.
And I don't do that so much anymore.
Okay, but as a consequence of working with TV writers, it's changing your technique.
Yeah, I think so. I've enjoyed being in those rooms where things are talked out, and I'm so used to being in a room by myself where I guess I could talk to myself if I wanted to, but basically it's just me against the blank screen of the computer. And I've kind of seen the merit in how you do TV.
When you first started out writing as a novelist, did you have a vision? Did you have some kind of end game? Did you ever think, I want to get into the New York Times bestsellers, or was it simple as, I just want to write one book to see if I can do it?
Well, I decided I wanted to write crime fiction, specifically crime fiction, not just I want to be a novelist. I wanted to write crime fiction when I was 19. And I didn't publish a book till I was 35. So it was like a long process. And, at those early stages, first, you want to see if you can accomplish it. Second, you want to see if it can be published. Third, you want to see if you can do it again, and so forth. So it's too much of a long shot proposition to ever be thinking about, I'm going to become a bestseller, or I'm going to hit the top of the charts or anything like that.